Welcome to today's webinar, Engaging Employees in Food Waste Reduction, a walkthrough of our open source employee engagement toolkit. I am Nia D'Amelio, the communications coordinator at ReFed, and I will be your host for today. As our title suggests, today will be a walkthrough of the Employee Engagement Toolkit, which is a new resource created by ReFed, the World Wildlife Fund, and Triple Win Advisory for the U.S. Food Waste Pact. We're going to be sharing the history of how the toolkit came to be and the projects that have been successful in engaging employees in food waste reduction through this process. And then we're going to bring up the toolkit and do a high-level walkthrough of what's in it and how to use those assets. And then, as I said, we will close out the presentation with a pretty robust Q&A session, I'm hoping. So please, like I said, feel free to ask any questions throughout the duration of the webinar in the chat and the Q&A feature. We are collecting them on our side, I promise, and we will address them during that period. So I want to first introduce my three colleagues who are going to be joining us at different parts of the presentation. First, we've got Ann Gartzka, the Senior Program Officer at the World Wildlife Fund on their food loss and waste team. She works with private and public sector stakeholders to work towards a more circular food supply chain, primarily through the voluntary agreement programs that WWF supports, which includes the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment and the U.S. Food Waste Pact, and Anne will be talking about both of those initiatives shortly. And in this role, she has had the opportunity to be involved in a number of the intervention pilots that we're going to talk about and the development of the Employee Engagement Toolkit, which is why we're here today. So she's definitely a great resource for both of those things. Next, we have Kate Gartner, the founder and CEO of Triple Win Advisory, which is a corporate sustainability advisory firm that supported the rollout of 3 employee engagement pilot projects commissioned by the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment. All 3 were with manufacturers, including Bob's Red Mill, a dry grain manufacturer, Cozy Shack, a brand of Land O'Lakes that manufactures puddings and custards, and Fresh Del Monte, a fresh cut produce manufacturer. Kate is going to actually do our walkthrough for us, so get excited for that. And then last but certainly not least, we've got Kristen Lee. They are the Director of Business Initiatives at ReFed, and they work across U.S. Food Waste Pact programming. So they will be joining us for Q&A a little later, just to support us there. I think Anne is going to get us started. So Anne, I will pass it off to you to begin with a little bit of the history of these projects.
Great. Thank you, Nia. Before we do jump into the webinar content today, I did want to share another opportunity to learn about this work. So if you're going to be at the ReFed Food Solutions Summit in Seattle, literally this month in just a few weeks, we are going to do a workshop on this topic on Wednesday, June 25th. It's open to all attendees. There's no need to register beforehand. And in that workshop, we'll be diving much, much deeper into the materials. It'll be very interactive, very hands-on. Think of it as like a practicum of the toolkit itself, so that you can really ground yourself in how you could deploy it in your operation. So for those of you who will be at the webinar, definitely think about joining that workshop, or rather be at the summit, think about joining that workshop on the 25th. But to start us off, I'd like to go over both the initiatives that have supported the work on employee engagement. And really over a long period of time, this is definitely a growth out of an original idea that started with the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment, or the PCFWC. They've been around since 2018, and in their area of focus has been public-private partnership to reduce food waste on the West Coast by 50% by 2030. And they have striven to do that by working with jurisdictions, business signatories, and resource partners. The work they have focused on has been on collaboration, sharing of best practices, and in particular, one of those ways is through intervention pilots and projects that implement and test solutions, like the employee engagement work we're going to talk about today. This work we're going to talk about really started with them and one of their business signatories, which is what we're going to start the storytelling with here in just a moment. But what that led to was more success, more investment in this area by the U.S. Food Waste Pact, which launched in 2023. The U.S. Food Waste Pact built on their work and took a national approach to deploy a voluntary agreement across the country, focusing on target, measure, act framework as a way to look at reducing food waste across the supply chain. And the pact has continued to build on these employee engagement efforts to bring them to a national scale. So at this point, we're going to turn and walk through the timeline and the learnings across the Employee Engagement Toolkit. And that really means starting with the first organization to raise their hand, and that was Bob's Red Mill. So as I alluded to, this is a long history and still active investment, not just by the organizations that are here on this call, but by these businesses. So in 2022, under the leadership of the PCFWC, Bob's Red Mill took on a project at their facility in Milwaukee, Oregon. It's a milling and packaging facility. And what they did was to define the scope of an intervention project that would bring food waste thinking and engagement to their frontline workers. In that pilot, employees went through a food waste training by watching an educational video. After receiving the training, they were engaged in an employee food waste reduction challenge where they were all given the opportunity to submit ideas of how to reduce food waste throughout the facility. Out of that effort came 176 ideas, and out of those ideas, out of those ideas, one was selected, but to reach that selection point, the ideas were divided into categories based on cost and ease of implementation. And one idea was selected, as I said, and that idea was chosen because it met the criteria of a quick win opportunity. I want you guys to focus on this definition because you're going to hear me mention it a couple of times. But a quick win opportunity is a low cost, low effort idea that could be implemented pretty much immediately. And in this case at Bob's Red Mill, the idea was to check scale buckets on a more regular basis and retighten bolts when necessary. That led to preventing the overflow of product. Again, super simple. You just needed a screwdriver and the employee to raise their hand and identify the idea. This was done on a line at the facility that operates short runs of specialty grains that are in particularly high demand. The idea itself was tested over a 5-week period, and a post-implementation audit showed an average reduction of food waste of over 70% for each product on that line. Those results were really significant. Double-digit numbers are always great to see, and this ended up leading to a lasting culture of sustainability at Bob's Red Mill. So just through that one idea, planted the seed for a lot more to happen. Not only did that lead to success there at Bob's Red Mill, but because of how successful that project was, other businesses within the business signatory community said, this looks really interesting. I'd like to replicate this kind of project in my facility, which led to another company raising their hand, Land O'Lakes. And Land O'Lakes engaged us in 2023 at their Cozy Shack facility in Turlock, California. And at that time, we said we'd love to replicate this, but we don't want to replicate it exactly the same way. Let's look for ways to learn a bit more, to build upon what we saw in the first round at Bob's Red Mill. So at Land O'Lakes, employees still received the training, but this time it was deployed in both Spanish and in English to ensure it could reach everyone in the facility. In this case, the challenge had more participation than the previous one and led to a total of 277 ideas being submitted during the Employee Engagement Challenge. Similarly to Bob's Red Mill, there was a single idea selected that met the quick win criteria. In this case, a very simple tool solution, much like the screwdriver at Bob's Red Mill. In this case, it was a spatula being used to scrape out additional product from condensed milk pails that would have otherwise just gone to waste. That led to an implementation that resulted in a savings of about $3,500 annually in terms of dollars, a 74% reduction in condensed milk waste, clearly an idea that worked and was implemented. A key change in this project was that throughout the competition and implementation phases, pass down messaging was implemented such that shift leads would come together with their managers at the start of day. They would huddle, they would communicate the project expectations, reinforce the learning that was communicated in the training. That continuity throughout the project really helped to drive those higher participation numbers that I shared just a second ago. Now, we've got 2 wins under our belt. After Land O'Lakes, interest in doing something at this was still high, and we also knew we wanted to continue iterating and refining the program. So at this point, Fresh Del Monte raised their hand and said that they would be interested in running a pilot in their manufacturing plant in North Portland, Oregon. Now, another difference, as we said, as we continue to iterate, we implemented a change at the beginning of this project, which was to establish a goal for the number of ideas submitted during the competition and a goal for participation. This helped both managers and staff to be on the same page and to be aligned to the end objectives. Again, we continue to share out the training in Spanish and English. And in this case, we added a Q&A session at the end of training to make sure employees knew not just about food waste, but what was expected of them, how to go about and look for ideas in the facility so that they could be more effective in their idea generation and in the generation of very specific and clear opportunities for the company to take action. In this case, there were 197 ideas submitted. Love these triple-digit numbers. These are always great to see. And what was really clear in this project is that the ideas were coming in were very consistent across the organization. People were seeing similar problems. They were thinking about how to solve them in a very similar way. And in this case, the quick win idea that came in and was implemented came from 3 different employees. So it had a lot of backing, a lot of energy behind it. Over an 8-week period, the quick win idea was deployed. In this case, the idea was to develop a new process for receiving fresh produce, changing the location of inspection from outside the facility to in. This was implemented and tested, and the result here was an average of 53% more food being collected that otherwise would have gone to waste. And what's super exciting about this, much like establishing the culture at Bob's Red Mill, Fresh Del Monte has found this project so successful and actionable that they are working to deploy and roll this out across their other manufacturing plants in the United States. Now, after all 3 successful projects in manufacturing, we now had interest to engage frontline workers in this kind of project in other sectors. And so we were super excited to have it, if you will, jump the fence. And Aramark, another signatory of both the PCFWC and the Pact, decided to lead an employee engagement pilot in the food service sector. They collaborated with Sodexo, a signatory of both initiatives, and Stanford Food Institute, a signatory of the U.S. Food Waste Pact, on this project. They engaged 10 different kitchens across the country. These were sites that were a mixture of corporate kitchens and collegiate campuses and collegiate kitchens. Each site had its own training, its own competition, and its own idea implementation period. The case study for this is getting wrapped up right now, so it'll be out in just a few weeks, so stay tuned for those results. As part of this project, we'll also be publishing some assets, much like the toolkit, but a little bit more dialed for the food service sector. So we're super excited to continue this theme of making these ideas actionable and scalable. Before we move on, I do want to share one cool thing about this project is with the kitchens, there's a lot more diversity of language in these kitchens than we had seen at the manufacturing facilities. And so food waste training for food service incorporated rolling out training materials in 5 different languages, not just Spanish and English. So again, constantly iterating and learning is a very important part of all of this. So while we're continuing to build on the program, we're continuing to expand. We recognize that we can't deploy this over and over, which brings us to what we're going to talk about, which is the Employee Engagement Toolkit. So over the last 3 years, as we've done this work with these different businesses, we've seen more businesses expressing interest in this across their value chain. We recognized it's not feasible or effective to keep running individual pilots. It's great for learning. It's great for getting some insights, but we want to be able to get this to as many people as possible, as many organizations as possible. So we took that energy and investment into a toolkit that could be a resource for anybody managing food. And that's how the Employee Engagement Toolkit was born. Now, while it was written for food businesses like those that we've talked about so far today with the pilots, the resource can be for anyone in food operations, from small grocery retail chains to food banks, basically anybody who's touching food can leverage this type of toolkit. It's totally open source, meaning it's not just for signatories of the PCFWC or the Pact. Anyone can access these resources at any time and use them to establish this kind of project. So now that I've given you the history, we're going to get into the toolkit itself. Kate is going to walk us through the toolkit. And since this is available to everybody right now, if you're watching the webinar, you can follow Kate along here in the webinar. That's up to you. Or you can go to the website itself. And if you have a second browser, you can follow along on the website and the toolkit itself. You have both options. And at that point, I'm going to hand it over to Kate to take you into the nitty-gritty of the toolkit. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone. I know we shared the link in the chat, but I still would like to show you how to get to the toolkit if you're just coming to the PACT's website. So right now, if we scroll down, we can see that there's a section here for the toolkit, but you can also go up to the navigation, the horizontal navigation, and go to resources, and then click on employee engagement. Then you scroll down into the page and you'll see the same access the toolkit section. So now we're in the toolkit. As you can see, the toolkit assets are organized across 5 domains. And each of these titles is clickable and will open up a number of assets related to that domain. We're going to start at the top and work our way down. Luckily, our first domain is titled appropriately so everyone knows where to begin. Right? So let's open up the Start Here section. These are high-level assets and documents that build the business case for an organization to implement an employee engagement program. Asset by asset, you'll find an editable PowerPoint deck for pitching an employee engagement program to your organization's leadership team. You'll be able to include your company's logo and unique data and statistics. But this Making the Business Case slide deck sets the foundation for what an employee engagement project requires and what kind of return on investment is associated with it. The slide deck is accompanied by a recorded scripted walkthrough of each slide to support your understanding of the pitch deck and to guide you onto how to customize the presentation to your organizational needs. There's also an employee engagement program roadmap that provides a recommended cadence for rolling out aspects of a comprehensive food loss and waste program. We're going to go into that in more detail at the very end. And lastly, there's a PDF that offers a roundup of best practices for ensuring that your employee engagement program meets with success. So the Start Here assets are foundational for you and your organization to understand what kind of investment something like this requires to be successful. The next section is the educational training videos. And these are meant to build awareness and excitement among your frontline workers by focusing on why reducing food loss and waste is an important and impactful endeavor. There are 7 training videos in this section, including 2 5-minute videos that provide a high-level overview of how food loss and waste impacts people on the planet. One's in English, and then the other one is in Spanish. Then we have 5 sector videos that are each 2 minutes in length. And these are designed to provide more relevant and targeted information by sector to your frontline workers. We have sector videos for distribution and manufacturing, grocery retail, quick service restaurants, food service, and hospitality. A little later, we'll talk about how to use some of these assets in a more a la carte way. But if you are rolling out a full-scale employee engagement program, these educational videos would be part of that employee training piece. The third section in this toolkit is the continuous improvement resources. And this one covers 3 key aspects of that idea gathering phase of a project. First, resources on Gemba walks, which include what Gemba walks are and the best practices for conducting one. Next, steps on how to record, capture, and categorize any food waste reduction ideas that might be generated by a Gemba walk. And finally, how to leverage a centralized system that allows a company to prioritize, track, and record food waste reduction ideas found by employees and through continuous improvement processes like a Gemba walk. And we call that centralized system the Food Loss and Waste Opportunity Register that you see here. So these are some of the resources that team leads and managers will need to gather and organize that employee-generated data that comes from our next section. And that next section, which is also the largest of the 5 domains, houses our employee competition resources. These resources include everything you need to run a comprehensive engagement competition. They include things like printable assets like wall banners and employee recognition and awareness posters, again, both in English and Spanish. Food waste idea submission slips, a briefcase box for capturing food waste submission slips, and a setup guide for all of those assets that are in this section. As you heard from the stories that Anne was sharing earlier, these competitions are the part of an employee engagement program where employees feel like they can really make a difference. They're the ones generating the ideas. So we've included a lot of interactive elements to strongly signal to a broader workforce that food waste projects are going on in the workplace. Now, we'll take you to our final domain, which is the waste reduction pilot resources. This section offers a guide for how to pilot a food waste reduction idea, and then some additional waste audit signage, again, in both English and Spanish. Taken together, as you can see, there's a lot of material in this employee engagement toolkit. And as Anne mentioned earlier, more resources around employee engagement are coming in a few weeks with a food service case study being published shortly. I'm gonna take a pause. We just walked through a lot of assets and resources. Before we dive into the program roadmap that walks you through how to execute a full-scale program that you see in this toolkit, I'd like to chat a little bit about your options and how to utilize the Employee Engagement Toolkit assets in an a la carte manner. This underscores the idea that aspects of the program can be successfully rolled out in a standalone manner and still deliver real and measurable impact. We recognize that your organizations may not need to execute a fully comprehensive employee engagement program as detailed here, or you may not be ready to do so quite yet. If this sounds like your organization, let me give you a couple of scenarios for how to pick and choose your employee engagement tools. Scenario 1, while you're building the business case to implement a more robust employee engagement program at your organization, you have the ability to begin building awareness among your workforce on food loss and waste by leveraging the high impact training videos that are available for immediate download and use. Scenario 2, knowing your company already places a strong emphasis on continuous improvement, you can quickly move to implement Gamble Box and capture food waste ideas from frontline workers by leveraging the customizable and user-friendly food loss and waste opportunity register that is ready for immediate use and is accompanied by a recorded how to use webinar that discusses how to customize the tool to your needs. So I would encourage everybody here to take a look at these resources at your leisure. And when you do that, don't feel like you need to use them all if you're not ready yet. You can absolutely pick and choose based on what makes sense for you and your organization at this time. Okay. Now, if you are ready to implement a full-scale program, the last thing I want to walk us through is our comprehensive food loss and waste program roadmap PDF, a mouthful. Again, it can be found in the Start Here section of the toolkit. This roadmap document is 3 pages in length, but we really only need to look at the first page, and it's up here right now. We've got 9 steps illustrated on a roadmap here, and there are reasons why they're in this particular order and on a particular cadence. And we'll get into that as we go along. So I'm going to go 1 through 9 right now. The first step is to make the business case to your leadership team. Why is food loss and waste reduction important? How can it be valuable? What's the return on investment for something like this? These are some of the questions that are bound to come up, and that pitch deck in the Start Here section will help you build organizational buy-in with management and your team. Step 2 is to learn about the best practices when it comes to implementing an employee engagement program. We've got a best practices PDF linked in this document that's also in the Start Here section. This resource is going to help you to know how to plan, implement, and to ensure your organization meets with success on its food waste reduction efforts. Step 3 is to get your organization ready for an employee engagement program. This is after you've won organizational buy-in, and now it's time to rally the playmakers. These are the team leaders, plan and office managers, supervisors, sustainability leads, and communication heads. You'll build a cohesive plan for what programs to roll out, where and when to roll them out, coordinate the messaging, define desired outcomes, and the metrics for success. Step 4, you'll actually start implementing by deploying educational training on food loss and waste. This training builds workforce awareness on what food loss and waste is, why it's important, and tried and true strategies for reducing its impact within an organization's operations, processes, and practices. And the training is done using those videos in the educational training videos section of the toolkit. After training, in step 5, you'll conduct Gemba walks. Ruth knows what a Gemba walk is. A Gemba walk, just in case you don't know, is a management practice first used in manufacturing, but now is utilized more broadly to observe, understand, and improve how work is performed on the ground, directly where the value is created. It's a continuous improvement practice. And for an employee engagement program on food loss and waste, Gemba walks leverage the eyes, ears, and innate knowledge of frontline workers as they work, ensuring a rich opportunity for gathering food waste ideas to prioritize and pilot. Step 6 is when you roll out the employee engagement competition. This is going to engage and catalyze your workforce directly around how to identify food loss and waste in your operations. Everything you need for this step is in that employee competition resources section of the toolkit. After the competition is through, you'll move on to step 7, which is to aggregate, categorize, and prioritize the food waste ideas that you've collected over the competition period, as well as those uncovered during the Gemba walks. Doing this will help you identify which ideas are easy to implement, which require planning and financial resources, and which ideas are not viable to pursue at this point in time. Once you prioritize and identify the ideas you're going to implement, it's time to pilot those. This is step 8. You need to build a procedure for measuring the food waste reduction idea before and after the selection is implemented. Take detailed measurements throughout the process, and then analyze the data to see how significantly the idea reduces food waste. The final step, step 9 of the roadmap, is to repeat various processes discussed above. Eliminating food loss and waste is an ongoing cycle of implementation, measurement, analysis, and continuous improvement. You could consider establishing quarterly employee training or making training mandatory for new hires. You could deploy Gemba walks on a regular basis, such as monthly. And you could run employee competitions, say biannually or annually, to keep engagement up via this fun and cost-effective way. Managing, reducing, and mitigating food waste is in fact an iterative process. Engaging your whole organization in this work can lead to really incredible results. This type of employee engagement program has multiplicative benefits, including improving the bottom line, getting employees excited about the work that they do, rallying them around your company's sustainability goals, creating a culture of sustainability, and of course, helping to reduce food loss and waste for your organization. Okay, so that was a high-level overview of the toolkit and how to put it into action. Now we're going to shift over to answering any questions you have. So I'm going to turn it over to Nia. Nia?
I'm here. I had to unmute myself. Thank you so much, Kate. We are going to keep this screen up at least for a time, just in case you want to use it as sort of like a guide to the resources. This is exactly what's on the website, but we wanted to just put it up so we can kind of focus on our 5 domains. As I said, we have been collecting questions, but please feel free to send more now. we are going to start the Q&A session. And before we do get started, I do want to introduce Kristen, who I had referenced earlier from the ReFed team. They're going to help us answer questions about the toolkit, and they've got a lot of expertise specifically in the food service sector. So welcome, Kristen, and we're also going to welcome Anne back too. So now the full squad is here. I see a question. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of questions. So first, this one goes to Anne. First of all, a nice compliment from our audience member that this is impressive. Thank you. I'm glad. It's going to be something that seems like you could use. So Anne, is this correct, or is it correct to assume that the specific employees for which this is relevant are those closer to the front line, i.e. working at the facilities versus middle management or senior executives?
It's a yes and a yes answer. So yes is what this is designed to do is engage those frontline workers. So the individuals who are cutting the fruit, who are bagging the flour, like it is truly to engage the folks who are directly touching the food that we all end up consuming. But it is also provides the materials to engage leadership. So much of what Kate talked about in the Start Here section is about bringing the idea to leadership, whether it's a facility manager, whether it's a food and beverage manager at a food service facility, whether it's a corporate sustainability leader. So the materials are designed to bring that group of individuals in the leadership level on board. But the real engagement, the real value of the work is to actually start to listen to, engage with the frontline workers who are literally touching, seeing, smelling the food on a day-to-day basis. So yes and yes on that one. And I'd say Kate or Kristen, if you have anything to add to that, feel free to jump in.
Okay, nothing to add. Thanks, Anne. I want to ask a question to Anne or Kristen or Kate, honestly. Any of you could answer this. I want to go back to some of the case studies that we covered at the beginning of the presentation. Anne, I know that you talked a lot about how we iterated on each project, and it seemed like more and more participants were getting involved with each. So I wanted to ask, like, what helped increase that engagement? And I guess how did you determine like what to iterate on, if that makes sense?
Kate,
Yeah.
Kate's got that one.
Bob's Red Mill was first. I did write down these stats. So Bob's Red Mill, we had 22% participation from employees that are working the plant, and we had 176 ideas submitted. When we talk about the ideas submitted, it does include all of the ideas that were gathered during the Gemba Walk as well as the competition. So know that it's an aggregate. And then we went on to Cozy Shack, and we had 77% of employees participate and 277 ideas. And then lastly, at Fresh Del Monte, we had 75% participation rate and 197 food waste ideas. So Cozy Shack was the winner chicken dinner. One of the things that we know about so Bob's Red Mill was very involved, but they were a much larger manufacturing plant. All told, I think they had 8 different sections, and we walked all 8 parts of the plant, but we really focused, the Gemba walks on one or two parts of that plant. So I would assume that the reason why that 22%, the participation rate was 22% versus 75 is just because we weren't covering everyone that worked at the plant all shifts. Cozy Shack and Fresh Del Monte were a little bit different. We actually went to one very specific plant. They were quite small. The Cozy Shack Land O'Lakes plant was their smallest and also most wasteful plant. Interestingly, that plant had, it was a really cohesive group of individuals that worked there. A lot of longevity. Employees that worked there, typically around 9 or 10 years. There was a lot of family members, cousins, nieces, brothers, sisters. that worked together at the plant. So I just think that they knew each other well, and they all wanted to get on board and collaborate in the competition. And then Fresh Del Monte, we actually decided to set goals prior to rolling out the employee competition. We wanted to make sure that they were happy with the competition, and that it was going to meet their needs. And so we set specific goals for that plant. But also, that plant was a more contained plant than Bob's Red Mill. Yeah, so there's some nuances there.
Thank you, Kate. Awesome. We will move along to the next question. I think this one is for Anne. Does the toolkit reference the use of food rescue as an option?
I'm going to say it does not, but that does not mean it's off the table. And so if I'm interpreting that question, you're asking, is that an idea that comes up? Is that an option that comes out of the idea generation? And it absolutely has shown up in the opportunities that have been identified, I think across all of the projects, the idea of redirecting food back into the food supply, the human food supply chain. So it's not that we say, please think about this. As the individuals and the organizations have come up with ideas, the idea of food rescue, redirection to donation channels has consistently come up. If that was not quite the answer to the question, feel free to clarify, but food rescue has definitely come up as a destination and an idea. Whether it's a quick win idea or not is not always clear, but it's definitely come up as an idea.
Yeah, great reminder that all of the pilots that that the PCFWC and now the US Food Waste Pact have run, usually collect nearly 200 ideas each competition. So there are definitely a lot of ideas floating around across solution types. Another question, maybe for Kristen or Anne, any data with regard to how this might impact employees reducing wasted food in their home lives, and any experience with case studies that use businesses to improve overall community wasted food education?
Anne, would you like me to take this one and then defer to you? Yeah, so that's a great question. Thank you so much. At this time, we don't have any hard data on how this translates to how employees reduce food waste in their own homes. However, we've seen time and time again through this project and others that employees really are hungry for ways to make a difference. There's certainly translation between what people are doing at work and their home lives and vice versa. So I think that this is just a really great way to get employees taking action that maybe they've already started implementing in practice at their own homes, or to inspire them to translate that into their home lives with their families at home. Anne, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I'll add a plus to that. We don't have the data to draw a correlation or a connection between that, but what Kate did learn, the Triple Win team did identify in the development of these materials, is that organizations said, please educate on how our employees can impact food loss and waste in our operations, but also help them understand the role they can play in their homes. So in the educational videos, we do marry both a story about how they can play a role at the operations, where they work, but also in their homes, because companies recognize they have, they're interwoven, right? You see food in various places. So no data, but we do know through interviews and conversations the value of educating on both places where food loss and waste happens and the role everybody can play.
Perfect.
And I think one follow-up to that is on the case studies that use businesses to improve overall community wasted food education. I know there's lots of efforts underway at municipal levels to improve food waste reduction as a waste management solution. And one of the things that the US Food Waste Pact is doing now, we just launched a working group on consumer engagement and environments, because we do recognize the role that businesses can play within that food waste reduction. through both packaging and the way that stores or, food restaurant experiences are structured. So no case studies at this very moment, but know that we are doing work actively on that that will be publicly facing here in the next 6 months or so.
Awesome. Love that sort of cross-programming application. Please keep sending your questions in. I've got a couple more ready to go, but keep sending them in. We've got plenty of time. We're gonna kind of shift back to what we were talking about before. Is it necessary to select only one quick win idea, or can more than one be chosen?
I'm going to defer to Kate on that one as having been on the ground, if you don't mind, Kate.
Not at all. It was a part of these pilot projects to pick one quick win idea to pilot. That said, the reason why there is a food loss and waste opportunity register is so that all of the food waste reduction ideas go into it. They're all categorized. So we have talked comprehensively about quick win ideas, but there are other ideas that are categorized. There are gems that take a little bit more effort, maybe a little bit more money, financial work to put them in place, but they might have substantial impact coming from them. There are also categorizations of ideas called strategic investment, where they require long-term planning, budgetary planning, maybe even a capital investment. But again, could have a massive impact on reducing food waste in that particular process or operations. So the piloted one quick win idea. We typically got anywhere between 20 and 35% of the ideas were quick win ideas. And so the idea of doing the pilot is to show the worth and value of this work, and then to have the organization move forward with the other ideas, or to roll out the same quick win idea to other plants or operations. Does that answer your question?
So, and I'll do a plus on this. I think what is super exciting about the selection of even just executing one quick win idea is for frontline workers, it demonstrates they've been listened to and that they've been heard. And by doing it within a really quick sequence behind the competition and the idea generation, really closes the loop on the commitment at the organization level to the frontline workers. I think that may not have been stressed enough in what we talked about earlier, but that I think is a really important aspect to highlight because that's what plants the seed for culture change. That's what plants the seeds for behavior change within the organization. So really want to emphasize, even if it's just one idea, it's a great starting point to plant the seed for continued engagement and continuous improvement.
Thank you so much, both of you. We're gonna flip back to a little bit about buy-in now. So I assume maybe we want to talk about some of those assets related to getting institutional buy-in, but the question is, what strategies did you use to get companies to participate in the first place? And did you use any incentives for participation? And then this person specifically, and I do want to highlight this because this is a subject that comes up often, I feel like. They are looking to engage K through 12 schools in such a program. So they're curious about buy-in. Maybe something for the PAC team to answer.
I think I can take that one and answer both from the PAC standpoint, but also from a WWF standpoint. So we do have a number of food service signatories. And as I said, we're working on deploying a case study in this employee engagement umbrella in food service, though it does not include K through 12, it's collegiate and above. So I think there'll probably be some learnings there to help understand how you could engage at the K through 12 kitchens. So look out for that case study. But I would also say WWF has done a fair amount of investment in a program called Food Waste Warriors, which is about engaging the classroom, the instructors, designing curriculums to engage that K through 12 community. So I think between those two resources, there's opportunity there to kind of meet the need of what you just described. But definitely reach out, because I think there's we'd love to hear about what your need is, to make sure we're thinking about how to account for it in some of our future endeavors.
And I will mention now that I know that Anne's email is going to be posted at the end of this webinar, but then if you registered for this webinar, you'll get an email follow-up with her email and others as well. So you can definitely reach out. There's plenty of time. Okay, I've got another question. Maybe for Kristen. So from your work so far, what have you seen about who needs to be on board from a leadership level to unlock the time and resources needed to undertake this important work? And then they've got an example, which is there is a common function that has been the internal champion of this from headquarters. And in a related vein, waste can be linked to blame. So have you included tips and resources about how to overcome this cultural obstacles? So maybe we do the leadership piece first, and then we can come back to sort of the social understanding of waste.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a great question. There is definitely buy-in needed from a leadership level. If you navigate to the start here, we've detailed this within the making the business case, the walkthrough of that, like the voiced over resource there. Including from a food service perspective, your VP of Ops or account lead. It's very important to get buy-in on that. We've also included some ROI and metrics related to dollars and the impact that this can make. So I think communicating the business case to those leaders is a really good way to get that initial buy-in. That's not to say that you're not also including the champions. Any folks that you have as champions, you definitely want to loop those folks in and get them involved early on. And I would say, not necessarily within the context of this project, but more generally, creating a culture around not blaming, around reporting waste or food waste tracking is so important. If employees feel as though they're going to get in trouble for reporting waste, they're just going to hide it. So we really want to encourage an open culture and communication around food waste and removing that shame and blame to unlock the solutions, because frontline workers are such a key to tapping into food waste reduction. And Kate, I think you might have more to add on that.
No, I mean, I would just reinforce that. So there is an asset in the toolkit, and it's best practices for conducting a Gemba walk. And in that we do specifically talk about not you're alerting your staff, you're alerting your teams, you're alerting the shifts that you're going to be walking around. There's going to be a group of folks that are going to be walking around. They're going to be asking you questions about where waste happens, but it's not going to be individualized. It's not calling out. It's not a blame thing. And often what we say with the Gemba walks is to have shift workers and frontline workers be a part of that team, almost shift the teams and have it be really inclusive, so they know that this isn't about the higher level supervisors or the managers looking down on them and trying to find what's going wrong, but more this is a collective effort to improve food waste mitigation in operations. And then Anne had just mentioned in all of the videos, there is some common language that we use. So for all of the 5 sector videos, we do talk a little bit about, okay, what are some mitigation strategies? What should you be looking for, whether you work at hotels, in food service, or in manufacturing? But there is, it's like, if you see something, say something, tell somebody about it. So again, we're really trying to get away from the blame game and just really identification of issues that can be resolved.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I've got one final question. that can be for anybody. And then I'm also going to add a question to it as well. Any unintended negative impacts that showed up in the work? And this person's just wondering if there was anything to be sort of on the lookout for execution. And then I also think we have had a couple of like unexpected positive outcomes as well. So if anyone would like to speak to any sort of negative unexpected consequences or positive unexpected consequences.
I'll speak up first. Why not? I really don't think in the 3 pilot projects, again, at Bob's Red Mill, Land O'Lakes, Cozy Shack, and Fresh Del Monte, there were really any unintended negative impacts. What I would say, so everything was really positive, and the organization got engaged, and the workers really appreciated the competitions, the prizes, the incentives, the recognition that they are really there helping the organization identify problems and solving those, right? I would say that sometimes there's fatigue. So, when we've kept the competition at 4 weeks, because we've run it for 5 weeks, and we thought about running it for longer, and employees get fatigued. One of the ways to get around that is to recognize them, to have prizes, to just keep the energy pumped up, show them progress towards goals. And we instituted in the second and third competitions sort of this halfway part, part where 2 weeks in, we sort of had a, hey, we're going to get together with just to talk about the competition and food waste reduction ideas, having coffee and donuts. So again, it's just sort of taking a pause and let's keep focused for the remainder of the competition. And I would also say that there can be some fatigue at the end from an operational standpoint. And that's around implementing the idea. So they have a great idea, and people who are in the know with operations or processes are like, you know what, I'm just going to back in the envelope it. I know exactly how much this is going to be helpful to the organization. So the fatigue can sometimes come around not wanting to do the quantification portion of this work, of really quantifying the before, during, and after, and analyzing that in a data-driven way. And it's just because everyone's busy and they're working all the time and they have so many other things going on. But if you can just compel them to take a little extra time, put a standard operating procedure together, and then quantify, measure the impact, because all of that data can be really useful to go into another deck to make the business case for a more robust or comprehensive employee engagement program around food loss and waste.
And did you want to jump in?
I did. Definitely a +1 to what Kate said, and I want to sort of tap down into the data piece. And I think if anyone has a chance to go into either the Bob's Red Mill case study or the Fresh Del Monte case study, we have some video clips there from the sites. And in both cases at both sites, there are frontline workers who talk about, it was so great to see the data. I understood the impact of the change that we implemented, and it made it more tangible to them, which is, I think we all know, you do something on the back of the envelope, but it's not really solid. By having the exercise to really map it out, to build an SOP, to collect the data, makes it more tangible and makes it easier for people to connect their work and connect themselves to it. So I think that's a really important piece to have a positive, lasting impact.
Awesome. Well, thank you all 3 of you for answering those questions. And like I said, the conversation does not stop here. You can reach out at any time, and we'll make sure that you have all of the resources to do that. But with that, our webinar comes to a close. So we appreciate all of you taking the time to hear all about the work around employee engagement and the walkthrough of our toolkit. I urge you to poke around the toolkit just to get familiar with the assets. There's PDFs, videos, Excel sheets, pitch decks. There's all kinds of stuff in there. And shortly, this webinar will be added to the resources as well. So there's a lot to be learned and gained from them. And we hope that these resources are useful to you and your organization. If you have any questions at all, you can email Anne, and their email should be on the bottom of the slide there. This work does not happen in a vacuum. So we also want to thank all of the resource partners, jurisdiction partners, and signatories for the work that they've done to grow this program. If it were not for those first few projects, we wouldn't be able to provide these resources to businesses anywhere. So we really appreciate your commitment to reducing food waste. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you in Seattle at the ReFed Food Waste Solutions Summit at our workshop on June 25th, or seeing you at our next webinar. Thanks all.